I'm John Holl. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. And this is again one of those shows that I wish I could have done in person. Jennifer Talley, the longtime award-winning brewer, is here to talk education, Pilsner, and a new IPA she's brewed with Firestone Walker. Stay to the end, and you won't be disappointed. But first, I'm glad to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Bull-Eyed Communications. Do you have the right messages in place to make your brewery stand out in a crowded field? Are you executing with trusted partners who know the beer industry? Are you receiving the right counsel? Bull-Eyed Communications is a creative and strategic marketing agency with decades of experience working with some of the biggest names in beer and consumer products. Bull-Eyed Communications offers a wide range of marketing services to satisfied customers, including positioning, sales collateral and POS, branding, website design, public relations, and social media. Talk with Bull-Eyed Communications today on how they can get your brewery and beer to stand out to audiences that matter. You can visit them online at bulleyeddcommunications.com or simply call 973-975-3037. You already make great beer. Let Bull-Eyed Communications help with the rest. And be sure to check out beeredge.com for articles, to subscribe to the newsletter, and to get episodes of the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. We're also on social media at The Beer Edge. And yes, we've expanded our This Week in Rausch Beer offerings. Not only do we have the Facebook group, you can search it at This Week in Rausch Beer, but we now also have Twitter and Instagram accounts that I'm desperately trying to keep up with. Get Rauschy with us at TW Rausch Beer. Jennifer Talley is a brewer's brewer, and I can't count the number of times over the years of covering beer that her name has come up, and it's often in awe and always in excitement when brewers talk about who they admire in the industry. Still, I never actually had the chance to interview her or have pints out in the real world. So when a press release from Firestone Walker arrived in my inbox this week promoting an IPA that Talley brewed with Matt Brynildson, I wanted to remedy that situation, and she graciously agreed to come on the show. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Sociology and a Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Utah, and that's the same state where she spent more than 20 years as the brewmaster and director of research and development for Squatters Brewery and Salt Lake Brewing Company. She's a graduate of the Siebel Institute. That's where she met Brynildson, and she was part of a pretty epic graduating class. Throughout her career, she's brewed for the Craft Brew Alliance, Russian River, Auburn Ale House, and more. And with nearly 24 medals at both the World Beer Cup and Great American Beer Festival under her belt, she's also the author of Session Beers from Brewers publication. She's currently on the board of the Brewers Association. She's on the Pub Brewer Committee. And in 2011, she was awarded the Russell Schurer Award for Innovation in Craft Brewing. She's been described as a force of positive energy, one of the coolest people in the industry, and in an email before this conversation, Brynildson simply called her a trip. She spoke to me from California, and I started off by asking about the style she wished got a little more respect by brewers and drinkers alike. Here's our conversation. Is there a style of beer that you wish got more attention these days, but that doesn't?
Yes, I do. I would love to see German Pils get more attention. I absolutely love a classic German Pilsner. I think it's a phenomenal beer. It's, of course, one of my favorite session beers to drink. Sometimes they tip above 5%, but I'm not too concerned with the fine lines of certain definitions. And they're just wonderfully refreshing after a hard day, whether you're in the yard or at work. And I think that the German Pils really doesn't get hardly any attention. And it's just such a lovely beer and so different than the American premium lager that, most of our palates are trained on here in North America.
Why don't you think it gets the attention?
I think, well, I'm hoping I haven't thought too much about that, but maybe because there's not enough, because it's so clean, because it's got such a purity about it, and of course that started with the water, and there's not much to say, but with little words there's so much so much there, and it's not about what you put in your beer, it's really what you keep out, and I think these days and I wrote about this in my afterward session beers, is I compared it to evacuating your house. I live right near a mine called Empire Mine, and we had to evacuate. I was bringing my son home from a football game, and I was supposed to write that day. And after I told the children to go into their rooms and go ahead and get their one favorite toy and put it in the car, and I packed up the pictures and I packed up the social security cards and the computer, which took about half hour to do all of that. I walked around in the rooms of our life really and realized I really don't need hardly any of this. What really brings quality to my life was in the car, which were my children and a couple little things, and that was about it. And I had to write, so I stayed with the house, and I couldn't technically write that day. So I just kind of wrote. My father was a writer as well, so sometimes it's just healing. So I just wrote. And what I ended up writing, we printed as the afterword, and it basically made an analogy of evacuating your home in a fire to evacuating your beer of things you don't need to put in it. Often these days, we're speaking of, I need to make a strawberry pastry black roasted stout with
Sure.
goo goo berries from my backyard, right?
Yeah.
Well, oftentimes, like the German Pilsner, it's just so clean, it's so refreshing, and it's 4 ingredients. Malted barley, hops, water, and yeast. And I think with the fast world of the craft beer industry and the way it seems to be kind of digressing or progressing, I don't know which one you're a believer in, but it's about what you put in it. And I kind of think that's why the German Pils is so left by the wayside, is because it's not what you put in it, it's what you keep out.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about, because I wrestle with that personally of, is the industry moving forward in a meaningful way, or is it falling backwards in a detrimental way? And I think about this a lot, and I try to have this conversation a lot, because there are new generations of brewers that don't see, the harm in, and maybe there isn't harm in adding all lactose everything, or Rice Krispies and Lucky Charms and Skittles and everything else to a beer. And then there's other folks who are really trying to hold a line of tradition. And I imagine there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. I mean, every style that we have right now was the result of experimentation, was the result of pushing things forward a little bit, or finding flavors and tastes that work, and consumers that wanted to drink them. But I
hear you, and my answer would be pretty simply. I think it's pretty simple, and although it seems complex on the surface, it's really very simple. Every brew pub I've ever worked in, every brewery I've ever worked in, I am the beers that sell. For instance, with 805, I mean, it is just
from Firestone, yeah,
right from Firestone. I mean, it's just all over California. It's number one selling beer in California, I think, right now, and so they make very unique beers and different fun things and hazies and all of that. But what's really selling? And I think at many brew pubs you'll have a lot of these, Rice Krispie stouts and things like that, and that's great. But what's really selling? It's probably their golden ale, or probably some light, lager beer, and hopefully it's German Pils with a fun name. But what's talked about is the specialty beer. So I really think the answer is simple. I think there's room for all, and then the customers, like you always have, they'll figure it out for us. If they start drinking and just demanding, how could you run out of that Rice Krispie stout? Of course we'll make a bigger batch next time. But usually what it is, oh my gosh, I've got to get another tank in here so I can keep my blonde ale up.
Yeah.
And then that still holds true today. So although it seems like the landscape has massively changed when it comes to consumption, I mean, IPAs obviously have grown massively, but still we consider that fairly classic style coming from, England and whatnot. So I think it still holds today that the majority of beer drank is, sessionable beers.
When American craft really started to take off in the 80s and the 90s and beyond, there was the ABV wars. It was, people were really trying to push the envelope, and how high can we get these beers? And I think it was, in everything that I've read and brewers that I've talked to, a direct response to decades and decades of bland, light American adjunct lagers of, okay, everything has been 4.5%, 5%, and clear and blonde and no soul. Let's do a 15% stout. Let's do
Mm-hmm.
IPAs that sort of push the limit. But session beers have definitely, and lower ABV, fuller flavor beers, there has been a steady march towards them again. And you're obviously a huge advocate for that. What in your mind constitutes a proper session beer?
I think that under 5%. I mean, right around there. I'm not like a stickler for 5.1, 5.2. I
Okay.
mean, there's a lot of wonderful Southern Hefeweizens that are 5.2 that you could just sit and drink in a beer garden all day long.
Mhm.
So you can't say, well, it's 5.2, it's not a session beer. I just don't believe in hard definitions like that. But I hover around 5. Now I think many people consider 4, and I've gotten beat up about this. And if people want to argue, have something to argue about, it's a fun argument as well as all the other ones. So let's have a discussion.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like a heated beer discussion? But for you asked me personally what I believe, and I believe around 5%. The biggest thing about the biggest definition for me is that it has to be a high quality beer. Okay, so that means absent, going back to that, it's not what you put in your beer, it's what you keep out. Absent of any flaws, no acetaldehyde, no acetic acid. Well, if it's kept in bay and it's further, and it's enjoyable time, and in the nice goes or something. So no high amounts of this acetaldehyde or diacetyl, and no oxidation, things that are off-putting, anything that's off-putting. Or let's say you used coriander in a nice wit. Well, you maybe got your notes wrong and used 5 times too much. And oh my gosh, okay, great. You used coriander, but you overdid it. So nothing too intense. So something that you want to revisit time and time again, and so you continue to want to gravitate back. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have intensely beautiful flavors coalesce and make you want to continue to revisit them, like the Parabola. I think I cannot pronounce that barrel beer
Yeah.
correctly, but
Parabola. Yeah.
yeah, it's a wonderful. It's not a session beer, obviously, but
No.
man, is it a beautiful beer? And that's a really good example of taking incredibly intense flavors and making them really enjoyable. But I would drink one in the evening with some dark chocolate or a cherry tart or something, and pair it really nicely. But for a session beer, you not only have to have it very clean, high quality. I do believe that thank you, may I have another is a line I say often when I give talks about session beers. I think a session beer you want to continue to drink them throughout the, the drinking session that you're having, kind of like a round by in England.
And what I've noticed is just as a drinker over the year, that if I get one beer and stick with it through the course of the night, and if it is a simple beer, but it has high quality to it,
Mm-hmm.
it continues to evolve. It starts to hit like its sweet spot, like on the third glass. Like I'm thinking of, like slow pour pills from Bierstadt in Denver. Like it's that beer really starts to reveal itself 3 glasses in, or maybe that's just me and my
No,
my
I
brain
would
getting
agree with
swimmy.
you.
Yeah.
No, I would agree with you because I think our palates change throughout the night as well. Our attention might change. We might start off. I mean, think about when you go into when you're drinking. So, I mean, we're talking a social situation, and it's situational. It like anything is. You walk into a social situation, you grab your beer, you instantly see someone you know. Your mind is completely, already talking, and you're drinking a beer. You might just be, thirsty. You might not be thinking at all. Then you might get a second beer, and maybe your attention shifts to watching someone else speak, or a music that's playing, or maybe sitting alone, or reading a book, or looking around the brewery. And now you're maybe paying more attention to the beer in your hand. So it's all situational as well. But I also experienced the same thing. I really experienced that when I was at Firestone during the collaboration, and I drank Pivo the whole time. I mean, not the whole time. I went through all of the beers, and they're wonderful beers. But Pivo was the one that I couldn't wait to continue to drink.
More with Jennifer Talley in just a minute, but first, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Bolide Communications. It's a creative and strategic marketing consultancy with decades of experience working with some of the biggest names in beer and consumer products. Talk with Bolide Communications today on how they can get your brewery and beer to stand out to audiences that matter. Visit them online at bolidecommunications.com or call 973-975-3037. And now, back to the fun with Jennifer Talley. So we should talk about this collaboration that you did. It's called Talley Cat Sunflower IPA, and I feel like I should ask if there are actually sunflowers in this beer.
Fair question. Fair question. As we considered putting sunflowers in, we knew it would not add to the quality of the beer. So Matt and I decided that we would restrain. And it's just really a play on words from a Grateful Dead song that we both like called China Cat Sunflower.
So I have this email from Matt Brynildson up on my desktop right now. And he said the collaboration was a 3-day journey of epic proportions. I don't know if I've ever heard a collaboration beer described as a multi-day process, first of all. I mean, maybe there's been one or two. But epic proportions makes me feel like I'm strapping in for, a screening of all of the Lord of the Rings films or something. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, I don't know legally what I'm allowed to shed light on, but I will know that when Matt and I, we've been friends for 27 years. And so we had not, and COVID has clouded all of our social engagements in the beer industry.
Yeah.
And we, of course, met in brewing school in 1995. And we have, we see concerts all the time, all over the country with all of our friends when we go to CDC. And we've traveled throughout Europe together with our friends, and he's a very close friend of mine. And so we've been, as everyone, been held up, kind of holed up in the house with COVID, and we got together. So that right there was an epic proportion of just us getting together and drinking and laughing and sharing. And sometimes that collaborations can get dangerous. So, we had a lot of good times. There's a great place that to stay near the brewery down in Venice, and we had great dinner and great laughter. I won't get into the specifics, but epic proportions absolutely describes it. And it was we both love to tell stories, and I mean, it had been, I just didn't realize how long and it's probably only been 18 months, but it had seemed like a lifetime since we had gotten together and talked. And it started out very quiet and lovely at his home, meeting his children for the first time, and then ended up with the film crew and the the brew and all of that, to where by the time I got home I was like, wow, that felt like a week. So
I know I've been around enough collaboration beers as they've been hatched or seen brewers sort of hash stuff out over time to land on what they're going to make. You two have known each other, you said since the 1990s, and you were part of one of the most, I think, storied classes at Siebel. I mean, I've seen the lineup, in there. I mean, Mary Pellettieri was on there, and David Ryder of Miller Brewing, and Lynn Kruger, who obviously went on to run Siebel. I mean, the list was. It must have been a pretty cool class to be in, and certainly the impact that class has had on brewing over the last 20 years is amazing. When two brewers like you and Matt get together, I imagine the conversations are a little bit different than some other brewers when they're talking about collaborations, because you have these great life experiences, and you've been at the top of some really wonderful and storied breweries. How does that conversation start when you're going to make a collaboration beer together? And then where does it go?
It's it was interesting. It was one of the first times that I've really collaborated. I've collaborated. We're always collaborating, okay, but like an official collaboration. I mean, I know there's been other ones in my lifetime, but it's been a minute, and especially one that's been put in a can with my name on it. I'll have to say that's my first, which I just thought was really endearing that they did that. And also, if you know Matt, I mean, to know Matt is to love Matt in the brewing world, in any world, really. He's just a fabulous human being,
He is.
so he's very easy to work with. with. So the conversation flowed so eloquently. We couldn't, we instantly picked two beers. It wasn't even up for thought, because we're both in California. IPAs are so popular. I'm always brewing session beers, and everybody always wants to brew, Pilsner with Mac as a pivo. So we just instantly picked like IPA, and how can we change it and do something, fun with it. And hold on one second. Just needed to decline a phone call.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so when we got on the phone, we instantly picked two collaborations we wanted to do. The first one, which turned out to be Talley Sunflower, and then the second one will be coming in a later date, and will be revealed. But it will be a sour beer, and we'll name it Sixth Element, and we can tell that story if you would like later on,
Yeah.
between Freem Family Breweries. I think Freem Family Brewery and Josh Freem, and then myself and Matt. And there's a whole large collaboration story behind that. But that will be an aged sour beer, made in barrels and whatnot. But the IPA was very, very easy to come up with that idea, because I wanted to make an IPA with him. And I'll never forget when I got my first IPA award at Great American Beer Festival, which was not that many years ago. I think it was like 20. I'd have to look, but it's something like 2012 or 13 or something. And
Yeah.
it was the silver at GABF, and I couldn't wait to find Matt, so he could say thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you, Jennifer, right? Because he's just the king of IPA.
Yeah.
And the first thing he said was, "Well, looks like I need to enter IPA again."
Oh man.
Which I hugged him. I'm like, yeah, it's just, we're that kind of friends. I mean, we just have so much fun with beer. We're not competitive, although we are. I mean, it's fun. It's fun camaraderie,
Yeah.
collaboration, and we're always collaborating. We're always talking about how to make beer and what to do. And so the most wonderful thing about this collaboration was I didn't know how Matt was going to be. It's a different kind of forum for us. And when we get to the malt profile, or we get to the hop profile, he would ask me. One of the things that they love to do there at Firestone, probably led by Matt, is this propagator series down at Venice Beach, where we brewed, is really to get the inspiration of other brewers around the nation and probably world at some point, in there. So, to get them out of what they're usually doing at Firestone, to get their minds kind of creative juices flowing. And so he really wanted to hear from me, which was just really, really beautiful. And so a lot of things were driven from some of my ideas, and that he thought were interesting, and that we grabbed onto.
So I'm just thinking about that comment at
Oh, it's a great
GABF. Like
comment.
that's
Yeah.
enough to strike fear into the heart of any brewer who overheard that. Because if for anybody who's listening to this, if you haven't been to the Great American Beer Festival, there's an annual awards ceremony, and what you can count on is seeing Matt Brynildson walk across the stage multiple times during the awards ceremony in multiple categories. I mean, that's just, you can set your watch to it. So, that's him entering a new category, I think would strike fear in the hearts of many a brewer. But obviously, I mean, I would think that there would be, or maybe I'm making too many assumptions here. But when it comes to creating a collaboration, especially for two longtime friends like you two, there could have been oh, do you remember that from when we were in school? Let's try that again, or hey, let's really sort of change things up and see what we can create from scratch. Did you think about like?
It went so easy, John. We got to, first of all, we got on the phone. Of course, Sam was part of that, collaborative conversation.
He's the brewer at the Propagator.
Yes, he's the brewer down at Propagator. And it was very simple. We just started at the top, and we just started with, grist profile. And he said, "What do you think?" And now I'm thinking about a grist profile of an IPA. It's extraordinarily simple for the most part, if you're going to make a classic West Coast IPA. And we instantly kind of said, "Well, we don't want any caramel malt in here," and we all agreed pretty quickly on that. And I said, I always wanted to put rice in it. I've always wanted to, make a 7% IPA, about drink like a session. And I think that adding an adjunct like rice could really help that process. And Matt goes, I love that idea. That sounds great. And Sam goes, guess what? I got rice in the house. And boom, there we're done. I mean, it was that quick.
Huh.
And so all of a sudden we have a unique, and it's still classic, I mean, for the most part, yeah, not even for the most part, it's still kind of a classic IPA, without having to bring in kind of, mined sunflower seeds from the hills of Southern California or something,
Yeah.
So, and then we went on down the process of, how do you like to do, your calcium? And I brought a lot of my session beer knowledge um, to the table, even though we're making a 7%. Actually, I didn't. When I wrote the session beer book, I studied up a lot on calcium and when to use it and how to use it. So I kind of brought in my toolkit for how I like to use calcium sulfate and calcium chloride throughout the brew, and um, the mash and the kettle, and brought in some of my process ideas that Matt was, interested in, that some of them they did and some of them, they didn't do as much. And we mixed it up there a bit. As far as temperatures and goes, we were all pretty much on par. And then the hops was, of course, extraordinarily fun. So it really was incredible smooth process. And I didn't know what to anticipate. I was a little nervous. I got to tell you, which I'm really, really nervous. I've done a lot of podcasts and, interviews and speaking engagements. And he's one of my closest friends, but I was a little nervous. I'm like, gosh, I mean, I'm not going to when it came to hops, we came to the hop section. I was like, okay, so, what would you like to do, Matt? Really, honestly,
Yeah.
I mean, cause he's so wonderful at it. And he's, came from, CalSec and a hop chemist. I just kind of looked towards him and he's like, well, I'm really interested to see how you would do the hops, Jen, is what he said. And I said, oh my God, that's so exciting. So
And
so
nerve
he
wracking,
really,
and yeah,
it was
flattering, and
nerve-wracking.
yeah.
Yeah. And so he kind of let me run with the scissors a little bit, but I backed it up, and I brought, I don't know if he read any of it, but I highlighted things and I sent him things, and he's like, I'm sure he didn't open any of them, and and gave him reasoning on why I would like to do it a certain way. And we ran with the scissors on that.
I would imagine that he probably did read it. He is
Yeah, he
he
probably
is
did.
he is one of the most ferocious readers that I've come across in the beer industry, in the beer world. Well, what drew you to the hop profile that you ultimately decided on?
Oh yeah. Well, when we came to the hot profile, he said, "How would you like to drive the bitterness? Where would we all agreed on the BU somewhere between 45 and 55. We did not want to be overbearing. At Siebel, Elsa was our sensory teacher, and one of the things she taught us was that the human palate could not taste. I don't can't speak for my dog, could not taste anything higher than 45 BU. So if you had a IPA at 45, one at 65, one at 85, your palate cannot, you know, tell the difference.
Yeah,
And that's what I was trained as. I don't know if I don't know if we've continued to do more research and where the research is currently on that and our ability and thresholds, but it's a fascinating, once again, fascinating fodder for conversation. And
yeah,
so I wanted to keep the BU level between 45 and 55, and so did Sam and Matt. We all that was instantly. We were all on the same page there. We didn't want to, we wanted the beer to be drank. You bought a 4-pack, maybe you get through all of them in the evening or something, as long as you're not driving.
yeah,
And but where you drive your bitterness has always been fascinating to me, and especially when I wrote the book. Um, on the I being a session brewer, where you drive your bitterness, I came to theorize, made a large difference in how you experienced your bitterness. Now you have to remember, this is just kind of sensory analysis, theory. Not, I would really like to do some hard, tried and true tests, maybe with OSU and on the
Tom
Shellhammer.
Helmer. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, and really kind of do some proving, proof to the pudding, and some hypothesis here. But I believe where you drive that BU, meaning where you isomerize those alpha acids in the boil or post boil, or in the whirlpool, or post boil in a dry hopping with auxiliary bittering substances that come off of your dry hops, or reduce bitterness through dry hopping, because there's many papers of theory written on that. And we're just scratching the surface here. I believe that you experience the bitterness on your palate differently, in the different ways you drive the bitterness in your beer. And so, and why I came up with that very shortly is because back when I was brewing at Squatters between 91 and 2011, at 4% ABV on draft, 14 taps, I, was trying to be creative as possible to disseminate the beers on tap, and I would try different things. So I would take high alpha hops, put them in the beginning, and noble hops at the end, and I was dry hopping and trying to learn all these different things. And I realized when I drove my bitterness at the very end of the boil to try and increase aroma. Okay, this is prior to huge dry hopping craze,
Sure.
if you can remember that far back.
it's
So I would
it's
reduce.
hazy. Yeah.
I know it's hazy, isn't it? I would reduce my IBUs at the beginning of the boil, and I would drive the aroma at the end. Well, I would also be driving the bitterness, because over 175 F, you're isomerizing alpha acids. So even in the whirlpool, you're picking up bitterness. I noticed that these beers on tap at 4% had a lingering, harsher bitterness on the side of my tongue.
Huh.
And so I started going, what's going on? I don't like that. Almost to the liking of astringency, or not liking of astringency. It's almost like astringent almost. But it wasn't astringent. It was because of the BUs. And so I went back to classic brewing, who would have thought, and pulled the BUs out of the end of the boil and kind of drove them more up front. I still did a flavor hop, about 15 minutes to end a boil. I call that a flavor hop, meaning I think you really get to taste the hop flavor, which I believe is different than the bitterness, different than the aroma. It's almost the tasting of the Hallertau Mittelfrüh, or the tasting of the Simcoe or the Cascade. About 10 to 15 minutes EOB, and then we did some aroma hop. So about 35% of the IBU was 10 minutes to end of boil, but the 65% was the first hopping and the second hopping, which was boiled for a bit of time, quite a bit of time, with a 60-minute hop and then a 30-minute addition. So we did 4 additions: one at 60, one at 30, one 10 minutes EOB, and one at whirlpool. And the 10 minutes EOB and the whirlpool only comprised 35 of the BUs. Well, that's what we calculated. That's a hand calculation. Okay.
Sure.
Of course, we got some auxiliary bittering substances from the dry hop, which we did a double dry hop on it. But the majority of that bitterness that we calculated came up front. And it also came from noble hops, which most people pick a high alpha. They kind of a workhorse hop, like a Magnum or something.
Yeah.
And just to get the job done, get some BUs in there. On a lot of these hazy beers, they don't put any even boiling hops in the beer anymore. They're even cooling the wort down. They're making 0 IBU beers, cooling the wort down, and then adding hops at 170 F in the whirlpool. They're actually installing equipment where they're cooling things down between the kettle and the whirlpool, so they don't isomerize at all. It's a whole new wave of thinking of no one wants any bitterness at all. And with our case, we wanted the bitterness of an IPA, but we wanted it, moderate, and we wanted it to fall on the palate in a soft manner and not in a harsh manner, not like a astringent manner, like I've experienced with later hop beers.
Yeah.
So that's where I came up with that idea. And then I also did, and I won't get into it now, but for further research, there's some wonderful books out there on quality of hop character and quality of bitterness. And I think there's just tons more research to be done, and which is, after, so many decades in the industry, still keeps both people like Matt and myself just super excited to get together and make a West Coast IPA.
Yeah. It's interesting on the BUs and keeping it in the 40s or 50s, because there was, for a while, this whole trend of the bitterness wars, where people were saying, oh, it's it's 100, it's 120, it's 312, like whatever these ridiculous numbers. And on some level, I remember thinking, gosh, and this was probably in the early 2000s, mid part of that decade, it was too much, and it just sort of turned me off for a while on some of the IPAs that were being cranked out, because there was no nuance to it. There was no, it was just listening to like an okay song at a really loud volume. And
yeah, it was. Yeah, I would agree with you. And the going back to getting that silver at JBF, when I was at Auburn Ale House when I was the lead brewer there, and he was on a kind of a beersmith program, and he was not calculating the whirlpool, or well, it was very low percentage of utilization calculation for his whirlpool and his final hopping. And one of the things I did, besides alter the malt and pull out some of the interesting malts that were in there, one of the things I did was pull out a large amount of BUs in the beer. And it was when I went and hand calculated it, this IPA we won with, it was calculated at 145 BUs, like you were saying. And one of the things I did was pull that out. And then for the first time, he gets to go up there and grab a silver award for his IPA. So I would attest a lot of the success of that IPA had to do with the altering of where those hops came into play when we put them in the boil, and also reducing them.
Is there a path forward for brewers to appeal to the younger drinkers, or the drinkers that are only, I shouldn't just say younger, because it's not really an age thing, but the runaway popularity of hazy, juicy New England style has put a lot of the West Coast on the back burner. And obviously they're still being made and they're still popular. But it's a tough sell for people who have come into beer through hazy IPA, where bitterness is not an attribute. Do you see a path forward for brewers to get those drinkers to come and embrace bitterness in the way that I think a lot of us who came up many years ago came to
Yeah,
appreciate it? Yeah.
yeah, I think it would be the one word I would have to say is slowly.
Okay.
So
We got
I
time.
mean,
Yeah.
but slowly also in IBUs. So let's say we're getting, we start flooding it with, yeah, I think the hazy thing started around 20, the low 20s. I was talking to a brewer the other day I'm working on a brewery with over in Miami, and he wants zero BUs in his hazy. And so it's just dropping and dropping. And so it's just kind of like an evolution. I mean, what goes up must come down, must go up, that sort of a thing. And I believe, the drinkers will get bored of their one fashion and they'll move over to another tap, and oh, well, that's interesting. So you don't want to put an IPA on tap that's harshly bittered and calculated at 95 or 100, right next to a 7 BU hazy juicy that they're used to. So
Yeah.
when I mean slowly, I mean is when they're, people are putting their lineup, brewers are putting their lineup on tap, kind of recognize, um, do they want the drastic, massive changes between each beer? Maybe they do want to have something middle of the road IPA like that's a 50 BU, so that when they go off of their hazy and they go maybe to a German Pilsner that's around that, or an amber ale, or steam beer or something, they can, you know, even some of the lagers like the Schwartz beers or the Viennese in the 20s or mid 20s, would be a nice step up as far as bitterness goes, to get them more used to kind of West Coast IPA bitterness level. So when I say slowly, I mean time wise, but also in level of BUs. I don't think we should be going right back to an extreme IBU craze again. I would like to not see us do that again.
um, I want to dovetail into something else. So I was going through old emails in anticipation of this conversation with you, and I found a press release from October 12th, 2011, when you were named the brewing manager for CBA for Craft Brew Alliance in Woodinville. And there's a whole quote here, singing your praises, deservedly so. And a quote ends with, we're excited to collaborate with her on creative new brews. She will be an integral part of our specialty beers in the pub and our cask conditioned beers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking back into the time machine of 2011 and being like, oh, wow, people were talking about cask beers then. What happened? That was a decade ago. Nobody really talks about cask anymore. Is there hope for cask in America?
I I have not seen that hope yet. Right now, I'm sorry. I'm sad to say,
I
and
mean, that's a line that we would never see in a press release in
yeah,
2021.
we wouldn't. And I think what happened, unfortunately, I did a lot of cask beers when I was at Squatters, and I've been, of course, I've been in Scotland and drinking quite a bit of cask beers over there. And
Yeah.
um, I think what happened is the craft breweries, we kind of got really busy. And so when brewers are really busy and maybe funds aren't so great, and the brewer's wearing so many hats, and then the owner comes down to the brewery and says, "Hey, I want a cask condition program," and this is back in the early 2000s. That guy's got a handle. I want that cool handle on my bar. It's going to look great. The brewer's sitting there going, I don't have any time at all yet to age these beers past 14 days, and now I've got to figure out how to put this cask program together, and I've got to, and cask, making true cask condition beer takes knowledge. It takes some foresight. It
Yeah.
takes more cleaning protocol, and especially the line cleaning protocol, especially at a proper cask temperature. And so I think what happened is a lot of cask beers went out there very poorly managed, as you probably
Oh yeah.
assumed I was going to say. And so if cask is going to hold on, or if cask is going to come back, let's say, it would have to be better managed for it to actually have a presence and stay this time. And there would have to be someone that really believed in it and really, really loved cask beers to drive that and give the brewer, the time to be able to run a good cask program.
Well, here's hoping on that front.
We can only hope. Yes.
So the 2021 Brewers Association board of directors term was just announced a couple weeks ago, and you are on the pub board.
Yes.
Pub breweries. This has been a really tough year for restaurants, for pubs, for breweries that rely on people coming in and sitting down and drinking beer and having a meal and everything in between. From where you see things right now, how are we going to remember 2020, and what's the path forward look like?
It's interesting. I was on a call this morning with the technical committee, which is one of the committees at the Brewers Association, and Jason Perkins from Allagash mentioned how there's a lot of course there was a lot of hardship that came along with COVID, and especially in the brewing industry, and also in many different industries and in families and healthcare and all of that. But one thing he said was, I have learned so much, from having to pull back and not being in retail and having to learn about cans and increasing can production and getting the, direct to consumer shipping, and that, learned so much. And I don't think we're ever going to go back to exactly where we were, but almost to a better place where, we focus so much on, right now we're focusing so much on draft line maintenance and quality there at the tap. But I think, to try to summarize, the positive thing
Mm-hmm.
is that, we had to be incredibly creative, very, very fast, to think on our feet to survive. As brewers and as an industry, especially small brewers did, to be able to keep their business loans going and keep their tanks full and get the beer to a customer. And thank goodness most states reacted very well and helping us do that with different shifting laws that they put into play, so we could get our beers to consumers. And I think what's going to happen is we'll slowly go back to where we're able to socialize again and go into pubs, and we'll just have a more open mind to, obviously, draft line maintenance, but also all the opportunity that's out there in to the direct to consumer market, and getting beers in people's hands, and people that don't want to leave their homes, and how to ship beers, and all the other opportunities that we might not have paid any attention to, because we were kind of over the bar retail pub brewers in that respect, and I'm speaking from a pub brewer aspect,
Yeah.
and the success of being able to create your pub and really make your entire business plan work out of just selling beer across the bar. And now there's all we had to not do that. So how else can we make money? So I think what's going to happen is we'll just become more successful, hopefully, pub brewers, by creating, having more opportunities offsite and also nurturing the ones that are on site.
I I am. It's been a while since I've been in a bar and been in a brewery with any regularity, and I'm missing as a drinker. I'm missing that personal connection, like the chance
No,
to
yeah.
sort of go in and sit at a bar and even just have a quiet moment of like taking in my surroundings or drinking the beer where it's made. As we think about direct to consumer though, and we think about how the nature of the pub is probably going to change, just because of the last year that we've been through. Um, how do how do breweries still make that personal connection though when people are still remote?
That's a really good question. I mean, how many consumers want to pop up their laptop and watch a brewer's kind of tutorial on the beer or whatnot? I mean, one of the things that I loved the most was giving tours and then going out to the table, and then and people just they ate it up at Squatters. They just loved it, and you go and you take them through your tasting and you tell stories. So how do you create that experience at home is a fabulous thing to think about, because the one of the number actually, I will go ahead and say on record that the number one thing that grows the craft brewing market is education to the customer. Okay, and to the consumer, and the more education they have about beer and understanding about beer, the more apt they are to spend $7 on a pint. Okay, and because the more comfortable they are to spend it, and no one wants to buy something for $7 and not enjoy it or turn it in or something like that. And I also think the fundamental principle of the craft brewing industry is the proper education of to the consumer, of the diversity of craft beers out there in the market. So how do we get that education and that also experience, like you said, to the person that doesn't want to maybe leave the house? Well, I don't think we can come to their house with mask on. I don't think that's going to happen. But I mean, it's going to have to be maybe with probably something that ships with the beer, which explains the history of the beer or the inspiration of the beer, pictures of the brewers, so something they can hold in their hands, touch, and read about while they're enjoying the beer if they're interested in it.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe a link, a scan where they can scan it, they can scan the beer and it pops up on their computer, and it gives a short video, and it tries to give that social experience, you know, in a non-social way. And that, for lack of better words, I personally also, John, really do miss going to the pub.
Yeah.
Really miss that actual social experience. I don't think it's replaceable, but I do think there are some things that you can do with the consumer that doesn't want to go, or the customer that doesn't want to go out of the door, with information that you provide with the shipment. Also, barcodes and your website and interactive information that they can engage in if they choose to.
Huh. Yeah.
And you just can't replace it. I mean, I just you're social or you're not.
Yeah. It just it yeah. I'm really curious to see how things progress over
Yeah,
the
and how
course of the
that
next year.
affects the and also how it affects sales of certain types of beers.
Yeah.
Because I think the craft beer industry was, it's large, like I said in the beginning of the conversation. Its rise, when I started, was about 2% of the market,
Yeah.
and up to about 12%. And the rise of that 10% gain is, touted as really being education about all the beauty and diversity that all beer can be. It's not just American premium lager.
Yeah.
And because of these pubs, and that server is a direct link to that education, that information, that experience. I mean, you can package it a bunch of different ways, but ultimately it touches on what you said. It's the experience, and that experience is brought to you not by the brewmaster, but by the server, by by the bartender, right there at the pub when you go and interact with that beer. And their stories and the ones that they've been educated. And I had a huge education um, uh, push and program at Squatters, and I was known for giving the tours and really training my servers to be my voice at the table and to be passionate. And I would try, you know, you can hire for skill, and I would hire for passion and train for skill in the brewery. And I think that's a really, I also would do that, in the front of the house if I had anything to say about it, because, you can't really train passion. And
Yeah.
it's that passion, that energy, the stories, the history, the fun, the experiences, why they did something new, and that really connects people to the craft beer world. And so, if learning how to get that experience at home without the front line server and bartender is really, the answer is always in the question. That's the question that we have to really kind of roll in our heads to keep craft numbers up in a direct to consumer world.
Wow. Yeah, and it seems when I first called you before we started recording, you were so upbeat and you were like, I'm doing pretty good, and I remarked that I heard that now twice today, and I think that there is a shift that people have mentally a year in, as more people are getting 2 shots in the arm, and there's hope on the horizon. At least it's spring here on the East Coast, so we're starting to feel a little bit warmer, and there's prospect of nicer days to come. But in that pub setting, it's been so grim for the last year, and in the hospitality industry, it's been so grim for the last year that I hope people can dig down deep and find some of that happiness and find some of that passion again.
Oh, I think they will. I really do. I believe people are starving for it, but they want to, of course, they don't want to lose it again. So I think people are being very cautious, and slowly getting back. But ultimately, we are social creatures, I believe, and I do think we will be back at the pub. I won't say rubbing elbows, but definitely standing closer to each other, and perhaps, having fun discord and fun arguments about beer again.
Well, I'm gonna say that I hope we can do another one of these conversations in person very
Yeah,
soon, because I thoroughly enjoy talking with you, because I'm always learning a lot, and thanks for taking the time. I really
absolutely.
appreciate it today.
Absolutely, and thanks for calling. I mean, calling a brewer that is not allowed to go to beer festivals and, talking about beer, call me anytime, John.
And I'll remind folks that the Talley Cat Sunflower IPA is a limited edition from Firestone Walker and Jennifer Talley, and it's available in, I guess, California right now, and
Yes.
some other places. Maybe is it going out in that very expensive Matt Brynildson box?
Oh gosh, I do not know. I know that the information is on Firestone Walker's website,
Okay,
so I would drive people there, and
sure.
they can. And I do know it's throughout California, and where fire and all their pubs. So I would just go onto their website, and it'll lead you right to it.
Go embrace the bitterness.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Jennifer's working as a brewery consultant these days, so get in touch with her if you want a real pro helping your brewery out. I can promise you that she'll be back on this show soon, and stay tuned for more information on that upcoming collaboration she mentioned. Who do you want to hear behind the mic on this show? Tell me through the email. It's John Holl, JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or you can join the conversation on Twitter at John_Holl. And be sure to check out beeredge.com for articles, to subscribe to the newsletter, and to get episodes of the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. We're also on social media at The Beer Edge. And we've expanded our This Week in Rausch Beer offerings. Not only do we have the Facebook group, but now Instagram and Twitter have joined the fold, and you can get Rauschy with us at TW Rausch Beer. And if you're interested in advertising on this show or Andy's show, we have surprisingly affordable rates, and we'd love to tell you more. You can reach out to Liz Melby. She's on email at liz@beeredge.com. And speaking of advertising, we're grateful for this episode's sponsor, Bolide Communications. Do you have the right messages in place to make sure your brewery stands out in a crowded field? Are you executing with trusted partners who know the beer industry? Are you receiving the right counsel? Bolide Communications is a creative and strategic marketing consultancy with decades of experience working with some of the biggest names in beer and consumer products. Bolide Communications offers a wide range of marketing services to satisfied customers, including positioning, sales collateral and POS, branding, website design, public relations, and social media. Talk with Bolide Communications today on how they can get your brewery and beer to stand out to audiences that matter. You can visit them online at bolidecommunications.com or call them at 973-975-3037. You already make great beer. Let Bolide Communications help with the rest. And that's it for this week. You know the deal. Nate Schweber, he does the music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo. And remember to defend Pilsner. I'm John Holl. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday. And that's when I'm back again to drink beer and to think beer.